It was a crisp October evening in the village of St Mary Mead when the first invitation arrived at Gossington Hall. The great house, once home to Colonel and Mrs Bantry, now stood under new ownership, belonging to the glamorous and rather notorious film star Marina Gregg. She had bought the property 3 years earlier, declaring she wanted a quiet English retreat, away from the noise of Hollywood and London. Quiet, however, had never quite suited Marina. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her drawing-room window with a basket of knitting, received her own cream-coloured envelope that same afternoon. The card inside was thick and expensive, embossed in gold. You are cordially invited to a reunion weekend at Gossington Hall, Friday 13th to Sunday 15th October. An evening of memories, laughter, and old friendships. Marina Gregg and Jason Rudd. Miss Marple smiled faintly as she read it. Memories and old friendships in the same sentence as Marina Gregg seemed rather ambitious. She had met the actress only twice, once at a village fete and once when Marina had come to consult her about some unpleasant letters. The woman was beautiful, talented, and deeply restless. By Friday afternoon, cars began rolling up the long drive of Gossington Hall. The autumn leaves glowed like copper and gold under the pale sun. The first to arrive was the distinguished playwright Gerald Bantry, son of the former owners, accompanied by his quiet, anxious wife, Susan. Then came Dr. Giles and his talkative wife, Mrs. Giles, who had once been Marina's secretary. Old friends from her early London theatre days trickled in, the once handsome actor Rex Fortescue, now slightly paunchy and bitter. The costume designer Ella Zielinski, sharp-tongued and fiercely loyal, and a few others whose names still carried faint echoes of past glory. Miss Marple arrived in a modest taxi just as the shadows were lengthening. She carried a small suitcase and wore her best grey wool coat. The butler, a solemn man named Anderson, greeted her with polite formality. "Miss Marple," he said, "Miss Gregg has asked that you be shown to the blue room. She remembers your preference for quiet corners." "How very thoughtful," murmured Miss Marple. As she was led upstairs, she noticed the subtle changes Marina had made to the house. The old library was now a grand drawing-room with modern paintings, yet the atmosphere of the place remained. Solid, English, and somehow watchful. Dinner that evening was a glittering affair. Marina Gregg swept into the room like a vision from the screen. Tall, slender, with that famous heart-shaped face and enormous violet-blue eyes. At 48 she still looked astonishingly young. Her husband, Jason Rudd, the brilliant but moody film director, stayed close to her side, his hand often resting protectively on her back. "Darlings," Marina cried, opening her arms. "How wonderful to see all of you again. It's been far too long. Tonight we forget the years and remember only the good times." Yet Miss Marple, watching from her seat near the fireplace, noticed small things. The slight tremble in Marina's laugh, the way Rex Fortescue's eyes followed her with something colder than admiration, the nervous way Susan Bantry kept twisting her napkin, and most of all the empty chair at the far end of the long table. "Who is the missing guest?" Miss Marple asked quietly when Ella Zielinski sat beside her. Ella gave a short laugh. "Ah, that would be the mysterious Mr. Ardwick. Marina insisted on inviting him. Says he's an old friend from America, though none of us have ever heard of him. He's supposed to arrive late tonight." The conversation flowed like good wine. Stories of forgotten plays, scandals barely avoided, and the golden days of cinema. Laughter rang out, perhaps a little too loudly. Miss Marple listened more than she spoke, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap between courses. At 10:30, the heavy front doorbell rang through the house. "That must be him," said Jason Rudd, rising. "The last guest." A few minutes later, a tall man in a dark overcoat entered the drawing-room. He was perhaps 50, and with iron-grey hair and a face that seemed carved from stone, handsome in a hard-weathered way. His eyes, however, were sharp and restless. "Marina," he said, his voice deep and American-accented. "It's been a long time." Marina stood frozen for half a second, then smiled brilliantly. "Ardwick, you came. I'm so glad." But Miss Marple noticed that her hands were clenched tightly at her sides. The newcomer, Mr. Ardwick, shook hands with Jason and gave brief nods to the others. When his gaze fell on Miss Marple, he paused for a fraction longer than necessary, as though recognising something in her quiet, observant face. The party continued until nearly midnight. Guests began retiring to their rooms. Miss Marple was among the last to go upstairs. As she passed the library door on the ground floor, she saw Marina and Ardwick standing close together inside, speaking in low, urgent voices. Marina's face looked pale under the lamplight. Miss Marple went to bed with a small frown between her brows. Something was not right. There was a tension in the house that had nothing to do with happy reunions. She woke suddenly at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. The house was silent, yet something had disturbed her. A sound, perhaps, or simply an old woman's instinct. She put on her dressing gown and slippers and stepped into the corridor. A thin line of light showed beneath the library door downstairs. Curious, she moved silently down the wide staircase. The library door was slightly ajar. Miss Marple pushed it gently open. Marina Gregg lay on the Persian rug in front of the fireplace, her beautiful eyes wide and staring. A silk scarf was twisted tightly around her throat. The full moon shone through the tall windows, bathing the tragic scene in cold silver light. Miss Marple stood very still for a long moment, her hand pressed to her chest. "Oh dear," she whispered softly. "How very sad." Then, with calm practicality, she turned and went to wake the household. The last guest had arrived at Gossington Hall, and death had arrived with him. The scream that tore through Gossington Hall at 2:30 that morning was not Marina Gregg's. She would never scream again. It belonged to Ella Zielinski, who had come downstairs for a glass of water and pushed open the library door behind Miss Marple. For one terrible moment the two women stood frozen. Then Ella's hands flew to her mouth and the sound escaped her. Raw, piercing, and utterly human. Jason Rudd was the first to reach them. He took one look at his wife's body on the rug, dropped to his knees, and let out a low, broken sound that was worse than any scream. "Marina! My God! Marina!" His broad shoulders shook as he reached out, but stopped short of touching her, as though even now he feared disturbing her perfect stillness. Within minutes the entire house was awake. Doors opened, footsteps hurried along corridors, and voices rose in frightened confusion. Gerald Bantry appeared in his dressing gown, his face white as paper. His wife Susan clung to his arm, trembling so violently she could barely stand. Rex Fortescue came last, hair dishevelled, eyes wide with what looked like genuine horror. Miss Marple took gentle control of the situation. "Mr. Rudd," she said quietly, "I think it would be best if no one touches anything. We must send for the police at once." Jason looked up at her, his eyes wet with tears. "Who would do this?" he whispered. "She was loved. Everyone loved her." Miss Marple did not answer. She had seen too many murders where the victim was loved by everyone, right up until the moment someone tightened a scarf around their throat. By 4 o'clock the local police had arrived, followed shortly by Chief Inspector Dermot Craddock from Scotland Yard, who Miss Marple knew well from previous cases. Tall, tired, and quietly competent, Craddock greeted her with a small, rueful smile. "Miss Marple, I should have known I'd find you here when I heard the name Gossington Hall." "I was invited as a guest, Inspector," she replied mildly. "I did not expect to be a witness." Craddock took charge with calm efficiency. The library was sealed, photographs were taken, and the body was examined where it lay. The silk scarf around Marina's throat was identified as her own, a delicate thing of dove grey and rose, one she had worn at dinner. "Strangled from behind," the police doctor said quietly. "Quick and surprisingly silent. She probably didn't have time to fight much." Jason Rudd sat in the drawing room with his head in his hands, while the guests were gently herded together. No one was allowed to leave. The full moon had slipped behind clouds, and the house now felt cold and watchful. One by one, they were questioned. Ella Zielinski, still shaken, spoke first. "I saw Mr. Ardwick arguing with Marina in the library just before midnight. Their voices were low but intense. I heard her say, 'You have no right to come here after all these years.' Then I went upstairs." Rex Fortescue's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "Marina and I had our differences in the past. Professional jealousy, nothing more. But I swear I went straight to my room after dinner. I took a sleeping pill. I heard nothing." Susan Bantry's voice was barely above a whisper. "This house, it's always had a sadness about it. Even when my parents lived here. Marina changed everything, made it beautiful again. Why would anyone destroy that?" her husband Gerald added gruffly. "We all have pasts, Marina more than most. But murder? In her own home?" Mr. Ardwick, the last guest, was the most composed of all. He sat with his long legs crossed, his weathered face unreadable. Yes, Marina and I had history, he admitted in his deep American voice. We were close once, many years ago in California. She broke it off rather suddenly. I was surprised to receive the invitation, but I came. We spoke for 10 minutes in the library. She wanted to clear the air. I left her alive at 10 minutes to 1. Miss Marple listened to every word from her corner seat, her hands folded in her lap. She noticed the small things, the way Ella's eyes kept darting toward Ardwick with something like fear, the faint red mark on Rex Fortescue's wrist that he tried to hide under his cuff, the fact that Susan Bantry had been crying even before the body was discovered. At 6 o'clock, when the first pale light of dawn touched the windows, Inspector Craddock came to sit beside Miss Marple with 2 cups of tea. "Any thoughts, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. "So many emotions in one house, Inspector. Jealousy dressed up as friendship, old love turned sour, fear of things long buried. Marina Gregg was a woman who collected people, and secrets. The question is, which secret was dangerous enough to kill for?" Craddock rubbed his eyes. "Ardwick is the obvious suspect. Arrives late, argues with her, last person to see her alive. But something feels too neat." "Exactly," murmured Miss Marple. "The obvious is so rarely the truth in these matters. Tell me, has anyone mentioned the child?" Craddock looked up sharply. "What child?" Miss Marple's eyes were gentle but sharp. "I overheard a fragment of conversation at dinner. Something about a child Marina gave up for adoption many years ago. A little girl, born with difficulties. It was during her first marriage, long before Jason. She never spoke of it publicly, but one does hear things." Before Craddock could reply, a constable entered with a small silver tray. On it lay a torn piece of notepaper, found crumpled near the fireplace. Written in Marina's own flowing hand were the words, "You are the last person I ever expected to see again. If you tell them, everything ends." The handwriting grew shakier toward the end. Jason Rudd, when shown the note, closed his eyes in pain. "She was afraid of something. She told me last week that someone was watching the house. I thought it was just her nerves, the old Hollywood paranoia." Miss Marple looked out at the rising sun touching the autumn gardens. The house that had once promised laughter and reunion now held only grief and suspicion. Somewhere in Gossington Hall, the murderer was still among them, drinking the same coffee, sharing the same shocked silence, perhaps even shedding real tears. And the last guest, Mr. Ardwick, sat quietly watching everyone with those hard, clever eyes. Miss Marple felt a small shiver that had nothing to do with the morning chill. This was not going to be a simple case of jealousy or greed. This was something far more personal. The morning after the murder dawned grey and heavy over St. Mary Mead. A fine mist hung over the gardens of Gossington Hall, turning the golden autumn leaves into dull ghosts. Inside, the house felt smaller somehow, as though the walls themselves were listening. Breakfast was a silent, painful affair. The long dining table, which had sparkled with laughter the night before, has now held only half-empty coffee cups and people avoiding each other's eyes. Jason Rudd sat at the head, unshaven and hollow-eyed, staring at the chair where Marina should have been. He had not slept. Miss Marple took her usual modest seat near the window, observing everything with quiet sympathy. She noticed how Susan Bantry kept touching her husband's sleeve, as if afraid he might vanish. Rex Fortescue ate nothing, only chain-smoked and stared at his hands. Ella Zielinski's usual sharp energy had collapsed into quiet weeping that she tried to hide behind a handkerchief. Chief Inspector Craddock joined them briefly, his face lined with fatigue. "No one is to leave the grounds," he announced gently but firmly. "We are treating this as a murder inquiry. Statements will be taken throughout the morning." After breakfast, Miss Marple found Jason Rudd alone in the small morning room. He was standing by the window holding a silver-framed photograph of Marina. "She was terrified of growing old," he said without turning around. "That's why she bought this house. She wanted roots, real ones, not the fake Hollywood kind," his voice cracked. "I should have protected her." Miss Marple sat down quietly. "Mr. Rudd, did your wife ever speak of a child?" He turned sharply. "How did you know about that?" "One hears things," she replied softly, "especially in a village like St. Mary Mead." Jason sank into a chair. "It was a long time ago, before we met. A little girl, born with some difficulties." Marina was very young, in a bad marriage. She gave her up for adoption. She regretted it bitterly later, but she could never find the child again. She used to have nightmares about it. She said the guilt never left her. And Mr. Ardwick, Miss Marple asked gently. Jason's face darkened. He was part of that time. He knew about the baby. I think he came here to remind her, or maybe to threaten her. Marina told me last week she had received a letter, unsigned. It said, "The past always finds you." Before Miss Marple could ask more, Inspector Craddock appeared. "Miss Marple, might I have a word? And Mr. Rudd, I need to speak with you privately." In the library, now cleared of the body but still carrying a heavy atmosphere, Craddock showed Miss Marple the latest findings. The scarf was definitely Marina's. No fingerprints on it except hers. The note we found was torn from her personal notepad. We've checked the alibis. Most people were in their rooms, but no one can fully prove it. Sleeping pills were taken by several guests, conveniently. He paused. And there's this. He held up a small gold locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a baby girl with large, sad eyes. It was in Marina's dressing table drawer, hidden behind some letters. The inscription on the back says, "My little Angela, forgive me." Miss Marple's eyes softened with genuine sadness. Poor woman, she carried that weight for years. The interviews continued all morning. Ella Zielinski broke down completely when shown the locket. "I knew about the child," she admitted, tears streaming. "I was with Marina in California when she gave her up. She was only 22. The father was not a good man. Ardwick was around then too. He was obsessed with her. When she left him, he swore she would regret it. Rex Fortescue was more defensive. Yes. I was jealous of her success. She got the roles I thought I deserved. But kill her? I'm an actor, not a murderer, though God knows she ruined enough lives." When it was Ardwick's turn, he remained cool and measured. "I loved her once. She destroyed me when she walked away. I came here because she begged me to in a letter 2 weeks ago. She said she wanted forgiveness before it was too late. We argued because I told her the past doesn't die so easily, but I did not kill her." Miss Marple watched him carefully. There was real pain behind those hard eyes, the pain of an old wound that had never healed. By afternoon, a new tension had settled over the house. While walking in the garden with Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple suddenly stopped. "Look there, Inspector. Those footprints in the soft earth near the library window. They were not there this morning." Craddock examined them. Men's shoes, size 10, fresh. They led toward the old summer house. Inside, they found a half-burnt cigarette of the same brand Rex Fortescue smoked, and a small piece of torn grey silk, matching Marina's scarf. "Someone is trying to point us in a particular direction," Miss Marple murmured, "but real murderers are rarely so careless." That evening, as the mist thickened outside, the guests gathered again in the drawing-room. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion and grief. Susan Bantry suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling. "I saw someone outside Marina's room at 1 o'clock, a shadow moving. I thought it was just my imagination, but now I'm not sure." Before anyone could respond, a sharp cry came from upstairs. Ella Zielinski came running down, pale as death. "My room? Someone has searched it. All my papers are scattered, and this was left on my bed." She held up a note written in the same shaky handwriting as Marina's earlier message. "You know too much. You're next." Ella's hands were shaking. "I didn't kill her. I swear. I loved Marina like a sister." Jason Rudd put a protective arm around her. For the first time, real fear showed on every face. Miss Marple sat quietly knitting, but her mind was working rapidly. The human heart was such a complicated thing. Love and hate so often twisted together. Someone in this house had killed out of a pain so deep it had turned murderous. And now that person was frightened. As the clock struck 10, the light suddenly flickered and went out for a few seconds. In the darkness there was a small crash and a gasp of pain. When the lights came back on, Rex Fortescue was on the floor, clutching his arm. A small dagger, one of the decorative ones from the hall walls, lay beside him, its tip stained with blood. "It only grazed me," he said hoarsely, "but someone threw it. From the doorway." Miss Marple looked at the frightened faces around her and felt a deep wave of pity mixed with resolve. The killer was not finished yet. And the last guest at Gossington Hall was becoming more dangerous with every passing hour. The small dagger clattered onto the polished floor, its blade catching the lamplight with a wicked gleam. For a few seconds no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Jason Rudd rushed forward and knelt beside Rex Fortescue. "Are you badly hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and strain. Rex winced as he pressed a handkerchief to his grazed arm. "Just a scratch, thank God." "But whoever threw that meant business." His eyes darted around the room, wide with accusation. "It came from the doorway behind me. Someone was standing there in the dark." Chief Inspector Craddock, who had been called back from the village inn where he had briefly gone to rest, arrived within 20 minutes. His face was grim as he examined the dagger and the scene. "This is no longer just a murder investigation," he said quietly. "Now we have an attempted murder in front of witnesses. No one is leaving this house until we get to the bottom of it." Miss Marple sat in her favourite armchair by the fire, her knitting temporarily set aside. Her eyes moved gently from face to face, noting the trembling hands, the rapid breathing, the way people shifted away from one another. Human nature under fear was a revealing thing, she thought sadly. The masks were beginning to slip. Ella Zielinski, still pale from the shock of the note left in her room, poured herself a large brandy with shaking fingers. "This is madness," she whispered. "Marina is dead. Someone searched my things, and now this. What have any of us done to deserve this?" Susan Bantry surprised everyone by speaking up with unexpected firmness. "Perhaps we should stop pretending. Marina wasn't the saint everyone wants to remember. She could be cruel when she felt threatened. She destroyed careers if it suited her, even friendships." Her husband Gerald looked at her in astonishment. "Susan, my dear." "No, Gerald. It's time to be honest." Susan's voice trembled but did not break. "She once told me she wished she'd never given up that child, that Angela haunted her, and she said if the past ever came back, she would do anything, to keep it quiet." Mr. Ardwick, who had remained strangely silent through most of the evening, now leaned forward. His deep American voice cut through the tension. "You're all circling around the truth but afraid to say it. Marina invited me here because she was scared. She believed someone had found out about the child and was going to expose her. She wanted my help to bury it once and for all." Jason Rudd's head snapped up. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ardwick?" "That the child, Angela, may not have disappeared after all. That perhaps she grew up knowing exactly who her mother was and came looking for revenge." A heavy silence fell over the drawing room. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl outside. Miss Marple spoke for the first time in nearly an hour, her voice soft and thoughtful. "Revenge is a very powerful emotion, is it not? Especially when mixed with the pain of abandonment. A child cast aside can carry that wound for a lifetime." Inspector Craddock took Miss Marple aside later that night in the small study. The house had finally grown quiet, though sleep seemed impossible for anyone. "We've traced the adoption," he said in a low voice. "The little girl was taken in by a couple in Devon. They changed her name to Angela Price. She would be 28 now. We're trying to locate her, but there's no current address. She seems to have vanished from records 5 years ago." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And the footprints by the library window?" "Size 10, as I said. Matches Ardwick's shoes exactly, but also roughly matches Gerald Bantry's and Rex Fortescue's." "Not helpful yet." He paused, then added, "There's something else. We found a diary in Marina's bedroom. Only a few pages had been written in recently. One entry says, 'He came back. I thought I had escaped him forever. If Jason finds out the whole truth, it will destroy us.'" Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "The whole truth? Not just the child, then? There is something deeper." The next morning brought thin sunlight and fresh tension. Breakfast was again strained. Rex Fortescue appeared with his arm bandaged, looking shaken but defiant. Ella avoided sitting near Ardwick. Susan Bantry seemed to have regretted her outburst from the night before, and kept her eyes downcast. Miss Marple took a gentle walk in the garden with Ella after breakfast. The younger woman's usual brisk confidence had been replaced by raw vulnerability. "I gave 15 years of my life to Marina," Ella said, tears glistening. "I covered for her, lied for her, even helped her hide that pregnancy. And for what? To end up like this, frightened in this damned house." "People do strange things when they are frightened, my dear," Miss Marple replied kindly. "Sometimes they strike out at the very person they once loved. Tell me, did Marina ever mention anyone else connected with that time in California? Someone besides Mr. Ardwick?" Ella hesitated, then whispered, "There was a doctor. He arranged the private adoption. His name was Dr. Paulson. Marina paid him a great deal of money to keep silent. I always wondered if he kept his word. Later that afternoon, while Inspector Craddock was on the telephone to Scotland Yard, a new discovery was made. One of the maids, tidying the unused east wing, found a small suitcase hidden behind an old wardrobe. Inside were women's clothes, a passport in the name of Angela Price, and a newspaper cutting of Marina Gregg from 10 years earlier. On the back of the cutting, written in angry red ink, were the words, "You will pay for what you did." The suitcase was shown to the guests. Jason Rudd looked as though he might faint. My God! She was here, in this house, perhaps even before the party started. Ardwick's face remained stony, but his hands clenched tightly. This proves nothing. Someone could have planted it. But Miss Marple noticed something the others missed, a tiny fragment of dried mud on the suitcase handle that matched the soil near the library window. As evening approached once more, the atmosphere in Gossington Hall had become almost unbearable. Old friendships lay in ruins, or accusations hovered unspoken in every glance. Fear had settled over the house like a second skin. Miss Marple sat alone for a while in the library where Marina had died, looking at the spot on the rug that had been scrubbed clean but still seemed stained by tragedy. So many broken hearts, she murmured to herself. So many lives twisted by one decision made long ago, and now the past has come calling, dressed in the shape of the last guest. She felt certain now that the murderer was sitting among them, perhaps even watching her at this very moment. And whoever it was, they were clever, desperate, and not yet finished. Outside, the autumn wind began to rise, rattling the old windows as if trying to warn them of what was still to come. The discovery of the suitcase in the east wing changed everything. By late afternoon, Gossington Hall felt less like a grand country house and more like a prison wrapped in autumn mist. Inspector Craddock's team worked methodically, dusting for fingerprints, photographing every corner, and questioning the servants again. Yet the real tension lay in the silence between the guests. Miss Marple found Jason Rudd in the conservatory, surrounded by Marina's beloved orchids. He was staring at a single white bloom, as though it might offer him answers. "I keep thinking about the last time she smiled at me," he said hoarsely. "Properly smiled, not the one she wore for cameras. It was 3 days ago, right here. She said she felt safe at last." A bitter laugh escaped him. Safe, in this house where she was murdered. Miss Marple sat on the wicker chair opposite him. "Safety is often an illusion, Mr. Rudd, especially when one carries such heavy secrets." "Did Marina ever speak of Dr. Paulson?" Jason looked startled. "The doctor who handled the adoption?" "Only once. She called him a necessary evil, said he had been well paid to disappear from her life." He rubbed his face tiredly. "Why? Do you think he's involved?" "Someone is," Miss Marple replied gently, "and that someone knows this house well enough to hide a suitcase and move silently through its corridors at night." Meanwhile, in the drawing-room, the atmosphere had grown poisonous. Rex Fortescue, his arm now properly bandaged, paced like a caged animal. "This Angela Price business is a distraction," he snapped. "Someone wants us looking the wrong way while they cover their tracks." Ella Zielinski turned on him sharply. "And who might that be, Rex? You, perhaps? And everyone knows Marina blocked your last big film role. You hated her for it." "I hated what she became," Rex shot back, his voice rising. "Not who she was. There's a difference." Susan Bantry, usually the quietest, surprised them again. She spoke in a small, trembling voice. "I saw Angela. Or at least I think I did. Last month, when I came to help Marina prepare for this reunion. A young woman was leaving by the back gate. Dark hair. Same eyes as Marina. When I asked who she was, Marina looked terrified and said it was just a fan. But fans don't get private meetings at the back gate." Gerald Bantry placed a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. "Susan, you should have told the police earlier." "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what it might mean." Mr. Ardwick entered the room at that moment, carrying the weight of everyone's suspicion like an invisible cloak. His face was stern, but his eyes showed deep weariness. "I didn't come here to kill Marina," he said flatly. "I came because she begged me. She wrote that she'd received threats, that someone claiming to be her daughter wanted money, and worse, wanted the truth told to the world. Marina was willing to pay anything to keep it quiet. I told her it was too late. The past always collects its debts." Inspector Craddock, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Mr. Ardwick, your shoes match the footprints outside the library window. Can you explain that?" Ardwick met his gaze without flinching. "I went for a walk after my conversation with Marina. I needed air. I stood by the window for a few minutes looking in at her. She was alive, writing at her desk. I left her there. That's the last time I saw her breathing." Miss Marple, who had quietly joined them, asked softly, "And what exactly did she write, do you think?" Ardwick hesitated. "She was writing a letter. I couldn't read the words, but her face. It was full of regret." Later that evening, as the household tried to force down another uncomfortable dinner, Miss Marple slipped away to the library once more. The room had been put back in order, yet the sense of tragedy lingered like perfume. She stood exactly where Marina had been found, and closed her eyes, reconstructing the scene in her mind. A gentle voice behind her made her turn. It was the young maid, Gladys, who had served at dinner the previous night. "Begging your pardon, miss," Gladys said nervously, "but I saw something odd that night, around 1 o'clock. I was coming back from the kitchen with warm milk for Mrs. Bantry. There was a lady standing at the top of the stairs, not one of the guests. She had dark hair and was wearing a plain coat. When she saw me, she hurried down the back stairs toward the east wing." Miss Marple's eyes brightened with interest. "Did you tell this to the inspector, my dear?" Gladys shook her head. "I was scared, miss. With all that's happened, I didn't want trouble." Miss Marple patted her arm kindly. "You've done the right thing now. Thank you." That night the house settled into an uneasy quiet, but sleep remained elusive. At 11:30, a muffled cry echoed from the first floor. Miss Marple, who had been reading in bed, rose quickly and stepped into the corridor. Ella Zielinski stood outside her bedroom door, clutching her throat. Someone was in my room again," she gasped. "I woke up and saw a figure by my dressing table. When I screamed, they ran." Craddock, roused once more, searched the room thoroughly. Nothing appeared stolen, but a small bottle of sleeping tablets lay open on the floor, several pills missing. "Someone tried to drug me," Ella said, voice shaking, "just like they did to Marina before they killed her." Jason Rudd looked utterly broken. "This has to stop. We're tearing each other apart." Miss Marple noticed something else, a faint scent of lavender in the air, the same scent that had been on the note found earlier. She said nothing, but filed it away carefully in her mind. The following morning brought the first real break in the case. Inspector Craddock received a telephone call from Scotland Yard. Dr. Paulson had been traced. He was living quietly in a small village in Cornwall. When questioned, he admitted that Angela Price had contacted him 6 months earlier, desperate to know the truth about her mother. He had given her Marina's name. "But there's more," Craddock told Miss Marple privately. "Paulson says Angela was not alone. She had been in contact with someone else. Someone who knew Marina well and wanted revenge for an entirely different reason. A reason connected to Marina's first husband." Miss Marple sat very still, her knitting needles clicking softly. She murmured. "Now we're getting closer to the heart of it. Not just an abandoned child, but layers upon layers of pain." As the mist outside thickened again, the guests gathered for lunch in heavy silence. No one trusted anyone. Every glance carried suspicion. Every word felt weighted. Miss Marple looked at each of them with deep compassion. These were not simply suspects. They were people whose lives had been shattered by one woman's choices, and now by her death. Yet she knew, with the quiet certainty that came from years of observing human nature, that the killer was growing bolder. The last guest had not yet finished what they came to do, and somewhere in the old house, under the watchful eyes of Gossington Hall, the final act was slowly taking shape. The revelation about Dr. Paulson and Angela Price's search for truth hung over Gossington Hall like the heavy autumn mist that refused to lift. By midday, the old house seemed to breathe suspicion. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made the guests start. Miss Marple sat in the morning room with her knitting, and the steady click of needles the only calm sound in the house. Jason Rudd paced restlessly near the French windows, his usually commanding presence reduced to a shadow of worry and grief. "I keep asking myself what I missed," he said, voice raw. Marina had been different these past months. Distant. Fearful. I thought it was the pressure of the reunion. I should have pressed her. I should have protected her. Miss Marple looked up with gentle eyes. "We often see only what people wish us to see, Mr. Rudd. Your wife carried many burdens alone. The child was only one of them. Inspector Craddock entered, brushing rain from his coat. He had just returned from interviewing Dr. Paulson in Cornwall. The doctor, now an elderly man with trembling hands, had confirmed everything, and more. Paulson admitted Marina paid him £10,000 in 1958 to arrange a private adoption and keep silent, Craddock said quietly. But he also revealed that Marina's first husband, an actor named Victor Brooke, was violent. He beat her badly during the pregnancy. The child was born prematurely because of it. Paulson believes Victor never forgave Marina for leaving him and taking the secret with her. Ella Zielinski, overhearing from the doorway, gave a sharp, bitter laugh. Victor Brooke, that monster. Marina told me once he swore he would destroy her if she ever found happiness again. But he died in a car crash in 1962. Or so we thought. Exactly, Craddock replied. The records say he died, but the body was badly burned. Identification was made through personal items only. It's possible. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Rex Fortescue slammed his good hand on the table. So now we're chasing ghosts. A dead husband back from the grave and a secret daughter. This is turning into one of Marina's worst films. Or perhaps the perfect murder, murmured Miss Marple. That afternoon, a police search of the grounds uncovered something significant near the old boathouse by the stream. A small leather-bound notebook belonging to Marina. The last entry, dated the day before the murder, read, "He is here. Not as himself, but I know those eyes. If I tell Jason the full truth about Victor and what really happened that night in California, everything I built will crumble. Angela is the key. She knows too. God forgive me." Jason read the words and sank into a chair, tears finally breaking through. She never told me the whole story. She said Victor was dead, that the nightmare was over. I thought I'd given her a new life. Susan Bantry, who had grown paler with each passing hour, suddenly confessed in a rush. I met Angela, not last month, 2 weeks ago. She came to the village. She looked so much like Marina it frightened me. She asked me questions about the house, about the reunion. She seemed angry, hurt, but also sad, like a child who never grew up properly. Her husband Gerald put his arm around her. "Why didn't you say anything, darling?" "Because Marina begged me not to. She said it would ruin everything if the past came out." Mr. Ardwick had been unusually quiet. Now he spoke, his deep voice steady but tired. "I knew Victor Brooke. He was no actor. He was a thug with a handsome face. Marina was terrified of him. When she left, he swore revenge. I helped her disappear from his world. That's why she wrote to me. She thought I could protect her again." Miss Marple observed him closely. There was genuine pain in his eyes, the kind that comes from old love that had soured into something complicated and bitter. As evening drew in, another incident shattered the fragile calm. While the guests were having tea in the drawing room, a crash came from upstairs. They rushed up to find Rex Fortescue's room in chaos. Drawers pulled out, clothes scattered, and on the mirror written in lipstick the words, "You helped her hide me. Your turn next." Rex stared at it, face ashen. "This is insane. I barely knew about the child. I only met Marina years later." But Miss Marple noticed something the others missed. The lipstick was Marina's favourite shade, rose nocturne, and it had been taken from her own dressing table. Inspector Craddock looked exhausted. "The killer is playing with us now, trying to frighten us into making mistakes." Miss Marple took a quiet walk with him in the damp garden as darkness fell. "This is not random cruelty, Inspector. This is deeply personal. The murderer feels betrayed on 2 levels, as the abandoned child and perhaps as someone who once loved Marina and was cast aside. The human heart can bear only so much rejection before it breaks into something dangerous." Craddock nodded. "We're checking Victor Brooke's death certificate again. If he's alive, he could have assumed a new identity. Ardwick's age and build roughly match what Victor would be now." That night, the tension reached a breaking point. At 11:30, the lights went out again throughout the house. This time it was no accident. Someone had tampered with the fuse box. In the sudden darkness, a woman screamed, high and terrified. Miss Marple, moving with surprising speed for her age, made her way toward the sound using the banister. Torches flickered on as people stumbled into the hall. Ella Zielinski was found slumped against the wall near the staircase, a thin cord around her neck. Not tight enough to kill, but enough to leave a nasty red mark. She was gasping for breath. "I felt hands. From behind," she wheezed. "Just like Marina." They whispered, "You knew everything and you said nothing." Jason Rudd carried her to the drawing room, his face a mask of anguish. For the first time, real panic showed in everyone's eyes. The killer was no longer waiting. They were striking openly. Miss Marple sat beside Ella, holding her hand with grandmotherly kindness. "You're safe now, my dear, but you must tell the truth. What did you really know about Marina and Victor?" Ella closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Victor didn't die in that crash. Marina arranged for a body to be identified as his. She paid a great deal of money. She wanted him gone forever. I helped her. God forgive me, I helped her." A stunned silence filled the room. Mr. Ardwick stood slowly. "Then the last guest wasn't me after all," he said quietly. "It was the past itself." Miss Marple looked at the circle of frightened, exhausted faces illuminated by torchlight and felt a deep wave of sorrow. So many lives entangled by one woman's desperate choices. Outside, the wind howled around Gossington Hall, as if mourning the dead and warning the living. The killer was very close now, and Miss Marple knew, with quiet certainty, that before the next dawn someone else would likely die unless the final thread of truth was pulled free. The attack on Ella Zielinski in the darkened hallway left Gossington Hall in a state of raw terror. The torchlight cast long, trembling shadows on the walls as Jason Rudd helped the shaken woman to a sofa. Ella's neck bore an angry red welt, and her usual sharp efficiency had dissolved into quiet, shuddering sobs. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "Just like Marina. The hands. They were so strong, and that voice. Low. Hateful. Saying I had betrayed her by staying silent all these years." Miss Marple sat beside her, gently patting her hand. "You're quite safe now, my dear. Try to breathe slowly. The truth is coming out at last, and sometimes the truth is painful." Inspector Craddock's face was grim as he examined the thin cord used in the attack. It was a curtain tie from one of the upstairs bedrooms. "The fuse box was deliberately tampered with," he said. "This was planned. Someone wanted panic, someone wanted another victim." The guests gathered in the drawing room, none daring to return to their beds. Susan Bantry sat huddled against her husband, her eyes red from crying. Rex Fortescue kept flexing his bandaged arm nervously, glancing at every shadow. Mr. Ardwick stood by the fireplace, his strong face carved with deep lines of exhaustion and something deeper. Regret, perhaps. Jason Rudd suddenly broke the heavy silence. "I want the whole truth tonight," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No more secrets. Marina was my wife. I loved her more than anything. If any of you know something that could explain why she died like this, speak now." Ella wiped her eyes and spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor Brooke wasn't just violent. He nearly killed Marina one night when she was pregnant. She fought back. In the struggle, he fell down the stairs and broke his neck. She was terrified. Instead of calling the police, she called Dr. Paulson and me. We arranged everything, the fake car crash, the unidentified body. Marina paid a fortune to make Victor disappear forever. She said it was the only way she and the baby could be free." A stunned hush fell over the room. "So Angela grew up believing her father was dead," Miss Marple murmured, "and that her mother had simply thrown her away." Ardwick nodded slowly. "I helped Marina escape to California after that. I was in love with her, but when she met Jason, she left me without a backward glance. Still, when she wrote asking for help 2 weeks ago, I came. I owed her that much." Rex Fortescue gave a harsh laugh that held no humour. "We're all pieces in Marina's game, even after her death. But I swear I had nothing to do with the child or Victor. I only knew her later, when she was already a star." Inspector Craddock looked at each of them carefully. "We've confirmed that Angela Price arrived in St. Mary Mead 10 days before the reunion. She stayed at the Blue Boar Inn under a false name. The landlord described her as quiet, but with Marina's eyes. She asked many questions about Gossington Hall." Miss Marple set her knitting aside. "And where is Angela now, Inspector?" "That's the problem," Craddock replied. "She checked out the morning after the murder. No one has seen her since." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, making Susan Bantry gasp. The house felt alive with old sins and new dangers. Later, when most of the household had finally gone to their rooms under police guard, Miss Marple remained in the library with Inspector Craddock, The room still carried a faint trace of Marina's perfume. "I believe the key lies in the child's pain," Miss Marple said softly. "Abandonment is a terrible wound, but there is something else, a deeper betrayal. And Marina didn't just give up her daughter. She erased an entire part of her life, including the man who fathered her, whether he was dead or not." Craddock rubbed his tired eyes. "We've been checking passenger lists and hotels. A man matching Victor Brooks' description, older now of course, travelled from America under the name Charles Victor. He arrived in London a month ago. He could easily be Ardwick, or someone pretending to be Ardwick." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "No, Inspector. Mr. Ardwick is exactly who he says he is. His pain is real. The man we should be watching is the one who moves through this house as if he belongs here." At 3 o'clock in the morning, another scream shattered the silence. This time it came from Susan Bantry's room. Miss Marple and Craddock reached it first. Susan was sitting up in bed, white as a sheet, pointing at her dressing table. A photograph had been placed there, an old faded image of a young Marina holding a tiny baby. Across the baby's face someone had scrawled in red ink, "She never wanted you." Susan was sobbing uncontrollably. "It wasn't there when I went to bed. Someone came into this room while I was sleeping. They could have killed me." Gerald Bantry held his wife tightly, his own face etched with fear and anger. "This has gone too far. We're being hunted in this house." Miss Marple picked up the photograph carefully. The handwriting was the same as on the earlier notes, shaky but deliberate. On the back was written, "The last guest sees everything." By breakfast the next morning the strain was visible on every face. No one had slept properly. Jason Rudd looked 10 years older. Ella's neck was bruised and bandaged. Even Rex had lost his bitter bravado. Miss Marple observed them all with quiet compassion. These were not monsters. They were ordinary people whose lives had collided with Marina Gregg's ambition, fear, and selfishness. Now that collision had turned deadly. During the morning, Craddock received important news from Scotland Yard. The real Charles Victor had been traced. He was Victor Brooke, alive, and he had been in England. But he had died of a heart attack in a London boarding house 3 days before Marina's murder. His belongings included old letters from Marina and a recent one from Angela Price. "So Victor is dead after all," Craddock said heavily. "But Angela received his final letter before he died. It must have contained the full story." Miss Marple nodded. "And that letter gave her the courage, or the rage, to come here." The afternoon brought one final chilling discovery. In the attic, hidden behind an old trunk, police found a small room that had clearly been lived in recently. A camp bed, some women's clothes, and a diary. The last entry, written in a young woman's hand, read, "Mother is having her perfect weekend, smiling at all her important friends. She doesn't know I'm already inside her perfect house. Tonight the last guest arrives, and tomorrow she will finally understand what she did to me." The handwriting matched the threatening notes. Jason Rudd read the entry and turned away, tears streaming down his face. My poor Marina. She was so afraid of the past that she invited it in herself. Miss Marple stood at the attic window looking out over the misty gardens. The pieces were falling into place now, but the final picture was still heartbreaking. The killer was no stranger. The killer had been living among them, breathing the same air, sharing their fear. And Miss Marple knew, with deep sadness, that before this night was over, the last guest at Gossington Hall would reveal their face. The discovery of the hidden attic room sent a fresh wave of shock through Gossington Hall. The small, cramped space with its camp bed and pathetic collection of belongings felt like the sad refuge of a wounded soul. Jason Rudd stood motionless, staring at the diary entry as though it had physically struck him. "She was here, under our roof the whole time," he whispered. "My wife was murdered by her own daughter while I slept only yards away." Miss Marple gently closed the diary. Not necessarily by her hand alone. Mr. Rudd. Pain like this rarely travels in a straight line. It twists and pulls others into its path. Inspector Craddock ordered a thorough search of the entire house once more. Police constables moved from room to room with quiet determination, while the guests remained confined to the drawing-room under watchful eyes. The atmosphere had grown almost unbearable, a poisonous mixture of fear, guilt, and exhaustion. Ella Zielinski touched the bruise on her neck and spoke in a broken voice. "I helped Marina hide that child. I told myself it was for the best. But if Angela was living in the attic like some ghost, God, what have we done? Rex Fortescue lit another cigarette with trembling fingers. I'm not part of this nightmare. I came for a weekend of nostalgia and free champagne. Not to be stalked by a vengeful daughter who may or may not exist. Susan Bantry suddenly burst into tears. I saw her again that night, the dark-haired woman on the stairs. I convinced myself it was a dream. If I had spoken sooner, Marina might still be alive. Her husband Gerald held her close, but his own face showed deep strain. The comfortable, ordinary life they had known before this reunion had been shattered beyond repair. Mr. Ardwick remained the most composed, yet even he looked haunted. I came here to protect Marina from her past, he said quietly. Instead, I may have delivered the final blow by agreeing to come. She trusted me. After all these years, she still trusted me. Miss Marple observed them all with profound pity. These were not cardboard villains or heroes. They were real people, flawed, regretful, and terribly human. Each carried their own small piece of responsibility for the tragedy that had unfolded. Later that afternoon, while the light outside turned grey and heavy with coming rain, Inspector Craddock drew Miss Marple aside into the study. "We found Angela," he said without preamble. "She's at the police station in Much Benham. She was picked up trying to board a train to London. She's not denying anything, but she won't speak to us properly. She only asks for you, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly. "For me?" She said, "Tell the old lady who knits that I'll only talk to her. She understands." An hour later, Miss Marple sat in a small, bare interview room facing Angela Price. The young woman was thin, with Marina's striking violet blue eyes and a face marked by years of bitterness. She looked both younger and older than her 28 years. "You wanted to see me, my dear?" Miss Marple asked gently. Angela stared at her hands for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and raw with emotion. "I didn't kill her. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. I planned it for months. I lived in that attic like a rat for 10 days, watching her laugh and play the perfect hostess. But when the time came, I couldn't do it. Someone else got there first." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Who, child?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I was hiding near the library door. I saw her arguing with someone. Then I heard a struggle and a terrible silence. I ran back to the attic. Later I tried to frighten the others because I was scared they would blame me. I wanted them to suffer the way I suffered." She broke down completely then, sobbing like the abandoned little girl she once was. "I just wanted her to look at me once and say she was sorry, that she loved me. Instead, she invited all her fancy friends and tried to bury me again." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on the young woman's shoulder. "I believe you, my dear, but there is still a murderer in that house, and I think you know more than you realise." When Miss Marple returned to Gossington Hall as evening fell, the rain had begun in earnest, beating against the windows like accusatory fingers. She gathered everyone in the drawing-room, including Inspector Craddock and 2 constables. "I believe I now understand most of this tragic affair," she said in her mild, grandmotherly voice. "Marina Gregg lived in fear of her past. She destroyed lives, her daughters, her first husbands, and those who helped her. But the person who finally killed her was driven by a different wound altogether, a wound of betrayed love and loyalty." She turned her clear blue eyes toward Ella Zielinski. "You loved Marina more than anyone, didn't you, my dear? You gave up your own life to serve hers. You helped her hide her child, fake her husband's death, and then watched her move on to greater success while you remained in the shadows. When Angela appeared and Marina decided to pay her off and continue her perfect life, something inside you finally broke." Ella's face went deathly white. "That's ridiculous. I adored Marina." "Yes," Miss Marple said sadly, "you did. But adoration can turn to hatred when it is never returned equally. You were the one who searched your own room to throw suspicion elsewhere. You attacked yourself in the dark to appear a victim, and you were the last person Marina spoke to before she died. You argued because she told you she was going to confess everything to Jason, including your role in the cover-up. You couldn't bear the thought of losing her, or of her finally choosing honesty over you." Ella rose unsteadily, her eyes wild. "She was going to throw me away like she threw away that child. After everything I sacrificed, I only meant to frighten her, but she fought back and... She collapsed into sobs, unable to finish. Jason Rudd stared at her in horror and pity. Ella, all these years. Rain lashed the windows as Ella Zielinski was led away by the police. The room remained silent except for the sound of the storm outside. Mister. Ardwick spoke at last, his voice heavy. So the last guest wasn't me. It was loyalty gone rotten. Miss Marple looked at the exhausted, shattered faces around her. Human beings are complicated creatures, she said softly. We can love and hate the same person with equal passion. Marina Gregg paid the final price for a lifetime of putting herself first. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Gossington Hall, washing away the autumn leaves but unable to cleanse the deep sorrow that now filled its ancient rooms. Only one chapter remained to be written. The storm raged through the night, as though nature itself mourned the tragedy that had unfolded within the walls of Gossington Hall. Inside, the drawing room felt smaller, heavier, filled with the quiet exhaustion of people whose lives had been forever altered. Ella Zielinski had been taken away quietly by the police. She had offered no further resistance, only repeated in a broken whisper, I loved her. I loved her more than she ever loved herself. Her confession, once started, had poured out like the rain outside. Years of resentment, silent devotion, and finally the snapping of a heart pushed beyond endurance. Miss Marple sat in her usual armchair by the fire, looking smaller and frailer than ever, yet her eyes remained clear and kind. The surviving guests and Jason Rudd gathered around her, seeking some final understanding, some way to make sense of the ruin. I suppose I should explain it all properly, Miss Marple said gently, her voice soft but carrying easily in the quiet room. One so often sees the pattern only when it's complete. She looked at each of them in turn. Marina Gregg was a woman of great charm and greater fear. She spent her life running from the consequences of her choices. When her daughter Angela appeared, demanding recognition, Marina panicked. She confided in the one person she believed would always protect her, Ella Zielinski. But Ella had reached her limit. For 20 years she had been Marina's shadow, secretary, confidant, fixer of scandals, suppressor of truths. She had helped fake Victor Brooke's death. She had arranged the adoption. She had sacrificed her own dreams. And now Marina planned to confess everything to you, Mr. Rudd, and perhaps even make some public gesture toward Angela in order to save her image. Ella could not bear it. The thought that after all her devotion, Marina would choose honesty and public redemption over their private bond was unbearable. Jason Rudd stared into the fire, his strong face etched with lines of grief. So she killed the woman she loved most? Miss Marple nodded sadly. In the library that night they argued. Marina said she was tired of living with the lies. Ella, in a moment of blind rage and heartbreak, seized the silk scarf and, well, you know the rest. The scarf was Marina's own, a final, terrible irony. Susan Bantry spoke in a small voice. And all the notes? The attacks on the rest of us? Red herrings, Miss Marple replied. Ella was clever. She wanted to create confusion and fear. She planted the suitcase, wrote the threatening messages, even staged the attack on herself. She hoped the blame would fall on Angela or Mr. Ardwick, anyone but her. Human beings under great strain can do terrible, calculating things while still believing they are the victim. Mr. Ardwick rose slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-lashed garden. I came here thinking I could finally close an old chapter. Instead, I watched the whole book burn. His voice was rough with emotion. Marina was the love of my life, flawed as she was. I hope she's found some peace now. Rex Fortescue, for once without bitterness, said quietly, We all played our parts in her life. None of us are innocent, but none of us deserve this ending. The next morning dawned pale and washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving the gardens of Gossington Hall glistening with raindrops. Angela Price was brought back to the house one final time. She stood in the drawing room, thin and trembling, facing the people who had been part of her mother's world. Jason Rudd surprised everyone by stepping forward and taking her hands. You are Marina's daughter, he said, his voice thick. That makes you family. Whatever anger you carry, you may stay here as long as you need. The house is yours too, in a way. Tears slipped down Angela's cheeks. She never even looked at me properly, not once. Miss Marple spoke gently to the young woman. Your mother was frightened, my dear. Fear makes people cruel in strange ways, but I believe, in her own imperfect fashion, she did love you. She simply did not know how to show it. The farewells were quiet and heartfelt. Gerald and Susan Bantry were the first to leave, Susan clutching her husband's arm as though afraid the world might crumble further, and Rex Fortescue shook hands with Jason and left with the weary dignity of a man who had survived something larger than himself. Mr. Ardwick was the last to go. He paused at the door, looking back at the house. "Tell the village not to gossip too harshly," he said with a faint, sad smile. "Some stories are better left half told." When everyone had gone, Miss Marple and Jason Rudd stood alone on the front steps. The autumn sun was breaking through the clouds at last, touching the golden leaves with gentle light. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you?" Jason asked. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Not the beginning, my dear, only that something was deeply wrong. People reveal themselves through small things. A tremble in the voice, a glance held too long, the way someone protects or accuses. Like Ella's love for Marina was the most dangerous thing in this house because it had turned sour." Jason looked at the great house behind them. "I don't think I can live here any more. Too many ghosts." "Perhaps that is wise," Miss Marple replied. "Some houses hold their memories too tightly." As her taxi waited at the end of the drive, Miss Marple turned back for one last look at Gossington Hall. The beautiful, troubled house stood quietly under the clearing sky, its secrets finally laid bare. She thought of Marina Gregg, beautiful, talented, and forever restless, of Ella, whose devotion had become destruction, of Angela, the child who had only wanted to be seen, of all the small human weaknesses that had led to such a great tragedy. "Dear, dear," she murmured to herself as the taxi pulled away. "How very sad it all is. And yet, how very human." Back in her own little cottage in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple picked up her knitting once more. The village would talk for weeks, of course, but she would listen kindly, offer gentle wisdom when asked, and remember that behind every sensational story lay ordinary hearts beating with love, fear, regret, and hope. The last guest had finally departed from Gossington Hall, and with her had gone the final shadow of a long and painful past.